the aim actually is, in this situation, to confuse the brain. We are programmed to have a need to understand. So when we, using this technique, start to confuse the brain by deliberately mixing messages and things that don't quite make sense, that are quite random, so you can put anything into the scenario that you feel may be useful, whatever comes up really. As long as we do it at a slow enough pace so that the brain is trying to follow you, eventually it will be overloaded with this confusion. We take a pause and then we give the brain something to grab onto, because by that time the brain is desperate for anything to make sense, and it will just try and grab onto that thing that will make sense. So when would we use a confusion technique? Well, I've used it in many scenarios, particularly when there's something stubborn that someone just doesn't quite want to let go of. So we may have done some rounds of tapping around guilt, for example, but they've had a whole history of holding on to guilt, and there's a part of them that just doesn't quite want to let go. So by confusing the brain temporarily by some contradictory random comments, which I'll show you in a moment, what happens is the brain can't hold on to that. You take that pause, it'll grab whatever you give it, and that will allow a lot of those thoughts and feelings to really settle down and to hone in on what it really needs to hone in on. Now, the whole time we're doing the confusion technique, we're going to be tapping around the third eye area. We'll tap all the way through these random comments that will go backwards and forwards. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. We just need to try and do it at a steady pace. And when we take that pause, which is really, really important, because that's the time when the brain is desperately trying to grab hold of something. So we'll take a pause for maybe 4 or 5 seconds from words, but we must continue to tap. And then we say the word. And what this does, it bypasses the reason and logic part of the brain, so that we are able to process at a much deeper level. And the reason and logic side of the brain is what often gets in the way when we're trying to clear stubborn emotions. Hence why we're going to use a confusion technique. So if we look at guilty, just because that's come up, it could be, one of the ones that I use quite a lot is just mess around with different figures that don't really make sense. Although I would suggest you don't use the figure technique with someone who's really good with maths or an accountant, because that doesn't tend to work with those sorts of people. So I could be tapping around the third eye area, and I could say something like, 40% of the time I feel 30% guilty. 30% of the time, I can feel 80% guilty. Sometimes, I feel guilty for not feeling guilty enough. And so I have to change it to feel guilty 80% for 80% of the time. Or, I could just let it go now. Okay? So again, it's random. It doesn't necessarily make, well, it's there not to confuse. And so it doesn't need to make sense. We just need to take that pause. Maybe we can do another one where, if I could tap on you, Austin.
Yes.
So when would we do this, first of all? As I say, it wouldn't be the starting point. You'd have done your opening statement, you'd have gone through the round of tapping, and you may be assessing and someone's saying, well, it's still there, or you know it's a really stubborn problem. And then so you can throw it in at any time, but it wouldn't be my starting point. I would do a few rounds of tapping first. So should we stand up a moment?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's look at anger. I've done some rounds with Austin, and there's still that anger that just isn't wanting to let go of. And I think, okay, maybe it's a good idea to help to bypass that reason and logic part of the brain. So would you rather me tap you, or would you rather tap yourself?
I'll tap myself.
Okay. Yeah. So keep tapping, and I'll just do this so you can mirror me. I want this anger.
I want this anger.
I need this anger.
I need this anger.
This anger keeps me safe.
This anger keeps me safe.
Although strangely, I'm totally out of control.
But I'm totally out of control.
When I feel this anger.
When I feel this anger.
This anger.
This anger.
I need it most of the time.
I need it most of the time.
But maybe I could let go of a little.
But maybe I could let go of a little.
keep a bit for the weekend,
keep a bit for the weekend,
particularly on a Monday.
particularly on a Monday.
But I love this anger.
But I love this anger.
I think I need a lot of it, a little of the time.
I think I need a lot of it a little of the time. Can I say, just there I could sense that I'm losing it. So isn't that interesting? Which is exactly what we want to achieve.
So I can keep a lot of it a little of the time,
So I could keep a lot of it a little of the time.
or maybe a little of it a lot of the time.
Or maybe a little of it a lot of the time.
Most of the time,
Most of the time.
but sometimes.
But sometimes.
Or
Or
I could just let it go now.
I could just let it go now.
Lovely. What a wonderful opportunity to confuse you, Austin. I don't think I've had that before, so thank you.
I knew there was a reason for it.
Yeah.